Welcome to episode 47 of the FoodGrads Podcast, the podcast where we explore careers in the food, beverage, and agricultural industries. I'm your host, Veronica Hislop, a PhD candidate in molecular science and career partner with FoodGrads. This week on the podcast, I interviewed Valerie Ivanova, R&D nutrition label developer and coordinator at Ventura Foods. Ventura Foods is a leading national manufacturer and marketer of branded and custom-made shortenings, oils, dressings, sauces, margarines, culinary bases, and pan coatings for the food service and retail industries. In this episode, Valerie told me more about her role at Ventura Foods and how she approaches creating nutritional labels for completed food products. What's interesting about Valerie's career journey so far was that she actually graduated at the time of COVID and when it was just emerging in Canada of March 2020. So she gives some insights about how that transition was and looking for a job during that period. Valerie was busy throughout her undergraduate degree at McGill University, graduating with a double major and volunteering with the Student Society. So I dug more into that and the decision on why she decided to do that and how it helped her in the long run. We also had fun talking about her participation in the Snacks for Kids IFT International Food Technologists competition and the really cool snack that her team designed. So stay tuned if you want to get some insights into that process. So enough with that introduction, let's get on with the show. Hi, Valerie. Thank you so much for taking the time to come out on the show. So I always think it's good to get us started with knowing a little bit about you and maybe starting with what you're doing right now. So can you tell our audience what you do?
Thank you so much for having me, Veronica. I studied at McGill for 5 years. I did a double bachelor in food science and nutrition. And after graduating from McGill, I dipped my toe into the food industry by working for Give and Go as an assistant product developer. Then I moved on to a company called FGF Brands, where I worked as a food scientist. And now I'm really excited to be working for Ventura Foods, which is a company that specializes in sauces and condiments. And in my current role, I'm an R&D label developer and coordinator.
Oh, wow. That's so cool. It's nice to hear a little shout out to Give and Go and FGF because they've done so many things involving food grads. Like they're really in terms of like helping the next generation. And I've heard they're really good environments to work for.
Yeah, they're really proactive in terms of hiring new talent. And especially, I was really pleased to know at Give and Go that they had this culture of allowing co-op students to work for them and just allowing co-op students to really see what an everyday job could look like after university.
That's really cool. So you mentioned that you went to McGill and you did a double major. How did you even manage something like that? And how the heck did that work?
So that's a really good question. I think there have been at least like 3 times during my degree when I was like, wow, I'm not sure that I could do this. But I was really glad that I persevered. To be honest, in the beginning, before I chose those 2 majors, I wanted to do dietetics at first. And after completing a first general year at McGill, which everyone has to do, I realized that I really liked both aspects of food science and nutrition. And I was also a really big fan of the fact that the program is so small. I believe we had maybe less than 10 people in our graduating year in that
Wow.
combined bachelor. And so because of that, it really allowed us to know each other pretty well and know our professors pretty well and just know the community pretty well.
That's really great. I know with Ryerson too, we had a release by the time we hit like fourth year, I knew every single person in the program and it really makes a better environment. But I just actually got more curious now that I think about it. I know a lot about the different courses that can be involved in food science, but like what composes nutrition in terms of, I know, of course, eat this, eat that, but of course there has to be much more to it. So what were some of the courses were you taking?
Yeah, it's honestly a really good question. So at McGill, there were those general nutrition courses that you do take, such as Nutrition 301 and like the Intro to the Human Body and Nutrition. But In terms of the nutrition being taught at McGill, I did find that there was more like of a physiology aspect to it. And so it was a bit more med based, which I found really, really cool because we would take classes like mammalian physiology where you actually learn about all these different diseases and how they can affect your heart and your brain and so on. And just taking that knowledge and combining it with the other knowledge that we gained from our nutrition courses, it was just really valuable. And I think it allowed for a really broad view of the human body. It was really great. I think they did a really like great interdisciplinary major.
That's really cool, especially considering it's also applicable to you. I could imagine, like, literally in your own body, like,
For
understanding a
sure.
little bit more
Yeah.
of the general knowledge, eat your vegetables, avoid
Hmm.
high-fat diet, but I don't really know anything more, so that's really cool. You mentioned about the role that you're doing. I could imagine that this is a nice complement to it because you mentioned you're doing labeling and for what? Let's start from the beginning and, like, how, like, a label is on a package and how that comes to be.
That's a really good question because I feel like before I started this role, I was in the dark as well. Before I came into this company and I started this role, I was working more on the product development side, which is prototype testing and plant trials and just a lot of trial and error. But becoming an R&D label developer, I would say like a finalized process, which I have enjoyed, where it's just clear cut. This is your formula or this is your product. It's wrapped up in a nice bow, and can you create a label for us? But the way that a label comes about is you have your formula, which I think is applicable to any food
Mhm,
company. And then I know that we use Genesis, which is a software that allows for us to create nutrition labels. And as you basically take your formula, you put it into Genesis, and it would just output a nutrition facts table for you. And all that's left is writing down the ingredient list. And ingredient lists can really vary based on what a customer wants or based on your company requirements for certain ingredient declarations. I think a good example is the declaration of soya because I didn't know this before. So soy in French can be declared as soya with a Y or soya with a J. And so it's really a matter of preference in terms of how you want to declare it. But
mm.
just like little, I would say like little things that you have to like tinker around with. And yeah, as I said, each customer is different. So working with the marketing department or the sales department and just working cross functionally to see what the customer wants and then going back, maybe editing the label.
It's funny that you mentioned soy and soya because, with my thesis, I deal with soybean oil, and I
Oh,
have
nice.
yeah, so I have my professor writing like, changing it, writing soybean oil, and I'm like, "No, I wanna write soybean oil." I don't know why I wanna write that, but apparently that's the thing I wanna go with, and it got me thinking, like, what is the proper name? Like, why is there differences? So I could imagine with food products, yeah, with labeling, there's a lot to it.
I wondered that too. Like, why is soy written so many different ways? Like, why can't it just be soy?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering too, like, why not soy oil? And I don't know. There's a lot of nuances to it. I could imagine dealing with different countries too have their own different regulations.
So in this case, it's just English and French locally, but
Mhm.
I can imagine if somebody's working for a company that has customers in like Latin American countries, which would require a Spanish label, that would also be another step in the label process.
Yeah, no, labeling is definitely a very complex thing. I can take it for granted just reading a label, but there's so much information that's just captured within that small
Mhm,
amount, and
mhm.
it really dictates how people, like, live their lives and make their choices, on a day-to-day. It's directly affecting them.
It really does. And I find like after I took this degree and after I took on this job, it's like the first thing that I check whenever I buy something at the store. Like I go straight to the nutrition facts table and the ingredient list just to see I guess it's a bit of a nerd moment, but just to see like how they're declaring their ingredients,
Yeah.
because there are different ways for like sugar-based ingredients or just for combining certain ingredients. So I'm always curious about that.
See, I didn't know that. I really thought it was a very clear cut if you put in, like, sucrose well, I think that's probably where you're going with this, but if you put in, like, fructose, high fructose corn syrup, that's it. Like,
hmm
that's all you put in. Like, so it's that I didn't know that.
I think a good example I learned pretty recently is like something like a sweetening agent. If it's in a product, it doesn't necessarily have to be labeled up under sugars. So you could have like your sugars and then a bracket with the sugars contained, but then your sweetening agent can be down the list of your ingredients.
Oh,
Yeah, pretty
that's
cool.
interesting. No, sugars are definitely, I could imagine, very complex. There's a lot of them.
Yeah, it's a big beast.
Yes, and then if there's, like, multiple ingredients, and if that ingredient includes it, like, maybe a chocolate chip has the sugar already in it because you import the chocolate chip, but then you add, I don't know, some other ingredient that has sugar, like, how you combine them, do they get combined? Like
Yeah, so it really depends if it's a sugar-based ingredient, and it all really depends on the CFIA regulations and what they consider a sweetening agent versus a sugar-based ingredient. So I found that their website has been a really, really helpful tool in this entire process of creating the labels because they have information about what a standard serving size is for ketchup, for example, and what a sweetening agent is considered. So that's been a really helpful tool in this
Oh.
entire process.
So, on the surface, though, like, it does sound like this job could be a little bit boring, to be honest, because you just mentioned, like, looking at the CFIA website and looking at this exact thing, and I'm wondering, is it just, like, innately a really exciting role for you, or, like, what's exciting you about it?
I think what really excites me about it is that this is something that is going to be facing a customer. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And some of the products that I've worked on are actual products that like the people in my life consume. So whether
That's
it be
cool.
like a restaurant chain, like a sauce for a restaurant chain that I'm working on, it's really exciting that it's something that could be on a package that possibly someone I know could be holding. So just knowing that and knowing the work that I'm doing is actually going to these big restaurant chains or like different customers, I don't know, I find that really exciting.
Hey, that's something that comes up a lot in the podcast is people saying
Yeah.
it was one of my favorite things when I was working, like, doing some of my co-op positions and just, like, knowing exactly what day this batch was made, who was making that, like, product, and just I think about it again, we were talking prior to this episode, and one thing that stood out to me that you had mentioned was that you had done I think it was the Snacks for Kids, the IFT competition, which the
Yeah.
International Food Technologist one, and I remember Adam Yee on his podcast, like, he had talked about that, but I thought IFT wasn't a big thing in Canada, so I would love to just gush about what you were doing with that and, like, how it was for you.
Yeah, for sure. So the IFT competition in general is a competition that allows food science students from different universities to compete in product development. And so it happens once a year. And the annual meet is usually in the summer, like around June, July. So our year in 2020, unfortunately, the pandemic happened.
Oh.
And before the pandemic happened, we were really excited to go to Chicago and meet other students and from different universities. But unfortunately, our competition was online in July, but at the same
Mhm.
time, it was a really valuable experience. So, like, it is bigger in the States, but I did find that McGill was such an international university in terms of so many people studying there from the States and from abroad that an opportunity like this would just present itself and it just made sense. But the way that I got into the competition was my final year of university, I took a course that was called food product development. And the main goal of that semester was to fully come up with a product that was new and that would somehow like be innovative and solve a food issue that's seen in the market today. And so our team chose to create a product for the kids category. And we wanted to create something that wasn't done before, but at the same time would seamlessly fit into any kid's lunchbox. And in order for it to seamlessly fit into anybody's lunchbox, like regardless of their dietary restrictions. And we thought that creating something that emulates a peanut butter and jelly sandwich would be really cool because I feel like everybody loves peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Like they're
For sure.
very classic.
When my school started banning the peanut butter and jelly, I was devastated, which I understood why they did it, but I was
Yeah, yeah. And I do remember like seeing that too and knowing that a lot of schools are going nut free. So because of that, we were like, okay, well, instead of nuts, let's create a pulse butter. And our pulse butter was made out of chickpeas. And we made the product vegan by replacing the eggs and what would go into the cookie with applesauce and
Mm.
then just using raspberry jam. And our whole idea was that these like little cookies would have like different emoji faces on them.
Mhm.
And then the kids could like Dunkaroos take a pulse butter pouch and like squeeze it on, and then take the jam pouch and then squeeze it on, and then maybe eat it by itself or maybe stick it together. But something fun like that. Yeah, we were just like really excited about, of course, creating this product because we got to create it in lab after a lot of prototype testing and then also being able to present this product. At first, we presented it to food industry professionals at the end of the semester. And after that, we were chosen to compete at IFT, which was so exciting. And we ended up winning second place out of like the North American competition, which was really awesome.
Congratulations, that's amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
That is really I can just imagine it in my head, and I'm going, "I would have loved something like that," and I could actually see my mom actually giving me that because my mom didn't really give me, like, sweets and all that, so this would have been something I could definitely see her giving to me.
Yeah, yeah, that was the idea. That it would still be a nutritious snack full of vitamins, but at the same time adhere to anybody's diet.
And that's really great as well that I find from what I'm getting at, the experience was really good and just really revving you up for being comfortable with product development. And did you find that when you, of course, you had your courses at McGill, but did you find that competition somewhat helped you when you were doing your first roles?
Oh my gosh, for sure. I was so glad I took this course because I feel like when I first started my first job at Give and Go, I already knew what prototype testing was. And I had a really great mentor at Give and Go. And I remember her telling me, like, hey, like, I don't think you're prepared for like what prototype testing is. And I'm like, no, like, I kind of know. I already have an experience. And she was like, oh, okay, that's great.
That's awesome. And if you mind me asking as well, did you find that the transition between your undergraduate and the workplace was an easy one, or was there something that you wish that you'd done differently?
That's a good question. So I would say there's a lot of different things when you start working fully 9 to 5. One of those being, I found at least in university, within my fourth and my fifth year, I was able to create my own schedule. But
Mhm.
once you enter the workforce, that's not really possible. And it has its upsides and its downsides. But I would say like a pretty big adjustment was just so Monday to Friday, like 9 to 5, just being there and being mentally prepared. Whereas I felt like in university, there are some days where you're not like really there 100%.
You're right.
But at work, you do have to show up because there's other people that depend on you, and projects like don't wait just because you are tired or something like
Mhm.
that. So I found that was an adjustment, but I feel like after 2 years, like now I'm better adjusted to the schedule like that.
Mhm.
And I'd also honestly say like deadlines are pretty similar to university, like just as stressful.
I can imagine with at least, with deadlines in school, if you fail at the end of the day, you're just failing yourself and it's not really affecting many
Yeah,
around
that's
you.
a
But
good
if
point.
you fail, if you do really poorly in your job, people notice and it affects people.
Exactly, and then you're like, you don't like, no one wants to get fired. No one wants to let other people down. But yeah, I fully agree with you there.
No, that's a really good insight about the schedule. And I remember when I started working full time, it was a really weird transition because I was like, okay, I guess I'm done at 3 p.m. Oh, okay, because it was an earlier starting shift, so it was like 7 to 4, and I would be like, I'm done.
That's
And then,
also, like, a big point, the fact that you're just done after the day is over versus university. It would be like you go to class, but then you still have to rush home and study or meal prep or whatever
yeah,
it was.
I've tried to bring that mentality. I try. Of course, it doesn't work because I went back to school after graduating. I tried to bring that mentality of the 9 to 5 somewhat. I really enjoy that about the workplace. It is something people don't like, but for people who like structure, it's really nice.
I also feel like it allows for healthy boundaries because if you leave your day like to be open to complete the work at any time during your day, I at least I found for myself like that wasn't like really great creating healthy boundaries for myself. And it would actually cause me to be more stressed versus getting all your work done or showing up and leaving at 4 or 5, let's say.
Well, that's really good. That's a good insight to know as well for some people thinking about life because it feels sometimes when you're in school, it never ends. So,
Honestly, that's how I felt as well.
unless you're like me, who's a glutton and just decides to go back to school and just keep going. But, anyways, but with that, so I know you're continuously learning during school and that, but what about now? Is there any, like, how are you learning right now? Or is there any skills or something that you're looking to improve on?
Yeah, that's I feel like that's a good question. Right now, currently, I would say I'm like focused on my role, but as well as like just being active on LinkedIn and seeing what my colleagues are doing. A lot of people studied at school with went on to do masters. So something as simple as like reading their papers or doing a bit more research on the ingredients that I'm listing in labels or in our products to see why this, for example, is considered a sweetening agent or why would this be considered an allergen. So just doing like I would say like little things here and there to just learn a bit more. And in terms of the future and if I'm going to learn more, I've always considered perhaps doing like another certificate, like maybe a project manager certificate. I'm not too sure yet, but
What are you thinking about with like a project manager? Of course, it's just in the works, but is that because it's dealing with like how to deal with multiple projects?
yeah, so I always found that their role intriguing because of that. And also I found it really interesting that they have to work with all of these different departments and just like seamlessly manage all of them because oftentimes there might be an issue with I don't want to like say there's an issue with like
Yeah.
R&D, but there might be something going on with R&D and you have to prepare for that and you have to bring it
Mhm.
to marketing or sales and be like, "Hey, this is what's going on. How can we tackle this?" I've had the pleasure of being in a lot of project meetings and seeing how the project managers work, and I found that to be a really interesting role, especially because I've like done so many years in student council.
Yeah. Oh, did you do student council when you were at McGill?
Yeah, I did. I did it for 3 years, I believe.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, you're doing a double major. Now I really question how you managed to get through all of this. So, could you tell me about it? Because that's actually something that I don't really talk about with guests. About a lot of people decide to do extracurriculars because it can help them get a job after, or they just
Mhm.
enjoy it. I mean, I'll admit my only extracurricular was like doing like the Japanese animation fan club. I just did
Oh,
not
wow,
have
that's cool.
I just showed up to club. I did not run any of it. I just didn't have it in me, Ryerson being a commuter school. But anyways, back to you. Do you mind talking a little bit more about what you did?
Yeah, of course. So when I first came to McGill, I wasn't like really like I knew I wanted to do extracurriculars, but I wasn't really sure what to join per se. First, I wanted to join like football team, but I believe like something didn't really coincide with the practices. Like it just didn't really work with my schedule and my classes. So after that, I learned about the dietetics and human nutrition undergrad society on campus, and I started there. I believe I was just like a U0 undergrad rep or something,
Okay.
but just like helping out with like events and seeing how the upper years, I guess, worked and our like little student council and
Hmm.
like seeing if they needed help and just it was really helpful to make those connections with older students. And after I did that year, I moved on to just broad student council, which was MCSS. So like the McDonald Campus Student Society. And so my first year there, I was the VP finance. So basically approving funding for like clubs and any new clubs that wanted to join the student society.
Hmm.
And my second year, I was vice president of business operations. So that role was involved in that role involved me overlooking, I want to say managing the bar manager, but like it wasn't, I feel like sometimes the bar manager like was fine working on their own, but basically overseeing our campus bar and our bookstore and making sure that they were functioning seamlessly.
Oh, that is that's so cool. No, I again, I'm coming back to the idea that I don't think about extracurriculars when I talk to my guests, and I don't know why when I could think that there's such a complement to school life in terms of like your 4 years and clubs. If it wasn't for people like you helping to run these types of events and all that, which I know that I attended a lot, I just didn't participate in actually the creation of them. So it's also really nice that you did like a business side-ish type role.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
it was
feel that could
nice.
be a really good complement with the business of food.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like after doing those roles, it made me think more about project management now because I think about it in a sense, those roles were being a project manager
Mhm.
because you had to deal with a variety of people and you had to manage a variety of people. But yeah, it was such a great experience, honestly. Really valuable.
Very cool stuff that you're doing.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, and then as well, another thing with our little pre-talk that you had mentioned was that you had also done some work as a nutrition educator, and I wanted to start talking a little more about that and tell first of all, I don't know when you were doing this. Was this also during university?
So no, it was actually my first role, like, outside of university,
Oh,
like,
okay,
right
okay.
after. Essentially what happened when the pandemic hit, it was a really, like, weird time and environment for everybody, and
Mhm.
I do remember that the job market was, like, it wasn't, like, as hot as it is now, and it was a bit strange during those
Was
times.
was that one little dip, like, as soon as things started going down, like,
Yeah,
job just
yeah,
dropped off, like
literally,
okay, it was that time.
because we graduated our last class was, like, April 30th or something, and that was when it was at its peak.
Mhm.
But I did have the pleasure of working for a nonprofit in downtown Toronto called College Montrose Children's Place. And they honestly, I wasn't familiar with them before I worked for them as a nutrition educator, but they just do such great work. And just meeting the people working there and just interacting with some of the families they help in the Toronto area was just like such an amazing
Mhm.
experience. But my role there comprised me leading nutrition workshops over Zoom with a fellow coworker. But we would essentially talk about how to create easy and fast, healthy meals for your kids and what kind of vitamins and minerals are fruits and veggies. Or another example is how to incorporate more legumes into your diet, because legumes are always really great in terms of just everything.
I'm gonna need to hit you up after this call because I
Yeah,
have been wanting to know a little bit more about that.
you will for you, of course. But yeah, it was a really great experience because it allowed for me to mm, just have that first experience as a nutrition educator, as somebody that's educating the public on nutrition, which I really loved actually. And I loved answering questions from these families and from these moms, because they really did care about what they were feeding their children. And they were like worried that, oh, what if my kid isn't eating this? Should I be feeding him this? And just assuring them that everything's okay. And like,
Was there anything that you found like interesting? Was there something that stood out that maybe the parents were asking you or you wouldn't have expected?
ooh, that's a good question.
Mhm.
I would say a really big question that those parents had, and actually I do get from like my family and friends, a lot of people have a misconception that frozen fruits and veg are lower in nutritional content than fresh, which usually isn't the case. Like it's pretty on par. And the amazing thing about frozen fruit and veg at your grocery store is it does tend to be cheaper and you can buy it in bulk. So for somebody on a budget, it's a really great way to get those nutrients in or to incorporate more fruits and veg in their diet.
Could you maybe just clarify why that is the case? Like, why actually is frozen veggies like on par? Because it seems like freezing something would deteriorate it somehow.
So usually in like a frozen life cycle of a fruit or a veg, if it's in the freezer for I believe like longer than 8 to 12 months, like that can happen. Like the nutrients do start to decrease or the quality starts to decrease. But I do know that in food processing, what generally happens is that something like peas or broccoli, they're harvested and then they're frozen right away. And a really great thing is that certain fruits and veg that are not always in season, but are picked in their prime season and then frozen right after, retain all their nutrients. And that might not be the case for something that's fresh, but it's maybe like sitting in your fridge for a while.
Yeah, no, it's a race against it's a lot of a shorter race dealing with a freezer because it'll be okay in a week if you
Exactly.
buy it, but if you buy it from the super, it's like I bought some grapes on Tuesday and I'm like, "Oh my god, I have to eat them now."
Right, right. Honestly.
And did you, like wow, sorry, I'm just, like, thinking back to this actually would have been a really good experience coming right out of school just to you're coming into working in product development and all that, but then actually talking with the people that I know, of course, you're not directly making products for these particular people, but just getting to see faces because you can go into school, you make your products, you do all that type of stuff where you learn about
Mhm.
this, but and you say, yes, I'm going to be making this product for that gluten-free individual who doesn't like this, but you don't see the faces.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Mhm.
And I actually found that working at Give and Go was a really great experience just because they're the creator of a product that I've loved for so long. I didn't know before I started working there that they created 2-bite brownies.
Oh, yes.
And I remember being a kid and just being obsessed with 2-bite brownies. Oh my gosh.
Like, were they not, like, the Canadian child staple to have at, like, birthday
Literally.
parties? Yeah, I feel you. I definitely feel you.
But yeah, it was always such a treat to have them in your lunchbox.
Yeah. My mom never actually, yeah, she always give me, like, the fruits and veggies, but on the weekend, like, all game, fair game.
That's good.
Yeah, no. And, no, and also, like, fond memories of going to my friend's house and just her parents would always get it for, like, a party and that, so, yeah, it was that's so cool. No, that is
Yeah.
awesome, so
Yeah. Definitely a Canadian memory.
Yeah, okay, it's not just me imagining this. So, one other thing that I wanted to go, like, within this theme of transitioning, is there any pieces of advice you would give to a student looking to go into the industry like you?
Yeah. So I've actually thought a lot about this because I've thought back to what would I have done maybe differently when I was in university. But I would say my biggest piece of advice is if you're looking to go into the food industry or perhaps take on a role in some other industry, like whatever you're passionate about, as soon as you get into university, do try to like build perhaps like a presence on LinkedIn or on campus and just network. Like it is so important to meet a variety of different people. And it honestly doesn't matter like what they're doing at the time or what you're doing at the time. Just making those really valuable connections can help you later on in life. And I just know for myself that through networking, I was able to get two of the three jobs that I've worked at in the food industry. There we go. I've had more than three jobs.
Okay.
But I would say networking is, oh my gosh, it's just so important. And if you, as a student, if you're looking to go into the food industry, don't shy away from maybe like messaging people on LinkedIn and just asking them questions like, "Hi, like, how are you? And how would you describe your company, your role at this company?" And just dipping your foot into something like that I think is really important because it'll give you such a good sense of what these food professionals are doing and what these roles can mean for you in the future. Because, of course, something on paper or on Indeed is not going to be the same thing
Mhm.
as it is in real life. So, yeah, I would say my number one piece of advice is network and just make really valuable connections with a different variety of people because it will definitely help you in your future career path.
That's really sound advice, and I also have to definitely echo it because I've had experiences where networking has gotten me jobs. And one of the things as well is you can use the student card to your benefit. It's
100%.
it's a
Yeah.
lot easier to say, "Hey, I'm a student. You're doing some really cool stuff. Can I pick your brain?" It's I find a lot more difficult when you're actually in a full-time job. Not that you can't do it, but I do feel like there's that little barrier to entry isn't as high.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And a lot of people are way more receptive to really depends on the person, but I would
Yeah.
say people in general are more receptive to students than perhaps somebody reaching out from a company that might be creating the same product or
Mm, that's a
yeah.
really good point, yes, and I find, like, those connections, of course, use LinkedIn to network when you're a little later early in your career, but I feel like those complement more to maybe going to, like, association events and all that and, like, seeing a face and striking up a conversation there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. Anyways, thank you for that advice, Valerie, and I think I'm gonna end it there because I have loved learning more about your university experience again. I don't know how you managed to do all that, but it seems to have worked out well for you. And just learning more about what you do now because labels are so important and they're honestly just as important as the product sometimes because the label is many times how people actually figure out that they want to buy the product.
Honestly, or something as like important as if somebody has an allergy, like the label is king for them.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Valerie, for coming on the show. I really enjoyed this conversation and I hope our guest did. I hope my audience did too.
Thank you so much, Veronica. It's really nice talking to you today.
That was episode 45 of the FoodGrads Podcast. All the notes to this podcast can be found on the FoodGrads blog or by clicking on the Student and Grads tab on the homepage. There you can find any notes to past or future episodes. Do you know anyone you would like me to interview on the show? Perhaps yourself or a specific career path you would like me to explore? Then reach out and let me know. You can email me at veronica@foodgrads.com or any of the FoodGrads social media channels. Hope to hear from you. I really have to commend Valerie for her tenacity graduating and maneuvering jobs during the pandemic. I can imagine how worrisome it would be graduating at such a scary time, though it is nice to see that things are working out for her. I hope you got a feel in this episode of how in-depth a role in regulatory is and the nuances there are. I personally learned that food labels aren't as necessarily cut and dry as I would have thought in terms of ingredients. I really thought it was like black and white, but I guess there's a lot more to it, so pretty cool job to learn a lot more about that. And it does show that there is a lot to learn when it comes to regulatory. So if you're looking for a role that is front-facing in terms of the consumer seeing what you personally worked on every single day, and they are making decisions based on that, then regulatory affairs might be the career path for you. Or labeling, I should say. Anyways, that's it for this week's episode. Thank you everyone so much for listening, and I will see you next time.